Hi everyone, Matthew from Meta API, and I will show you today how to synchronize Airtable data to a Grist document. So I have created an open spell just for you, and first I will explain to you how to configure it, and then I will explain to you all the code inside. So first go to open spell, click on sync Airtable to Grist and use this spell. So all the authentication is already done on my side. Next, and I have now some configuration to do. I have to configure the Airtable base ID, the Airtable table name. So table name is already done in the Grist document ID and Grist table ID. So let's go to Grist, create a new document. Perfect. I take the ID, I go to Airtable, I have already a database. Configured on Airtable with some value and Grist ID : that will be used. To store the Grist ID documents each time an entry is synced from Airtable to Grist. So I take the Airtable base ID, table name is OK, the Grist : this one. So you have to configure to match the : name on your spell. And for Grist, table 1. Table 1, that's OK. Perfect. And then I will go on each connector to check the authentication. OK, perfect. Everything is fine. And that's it. That's the only thing you have to configure. So let's run it. And we have an error, we have an invalid : inside the connector response. That's normal because we didn't configure. The : name on Grist and these : names have to match to Airtable. So I have test value and date value. So you have to respect if you have uppercase or lowercase character. And let's run again. Perfect. I see that I have some updated entries. That's great. So I see now all the data coming. From Airtable, and on Airtable I see that some Grist ID has been added on each line. So let's try to add another line with date. Perfect. So I don't see this entry here. I will run it again, and as you can see in real time, I see this new line coming and I have the Grist ID inside. So if I replace this by another value, run it again, so I see that the value has been updated as well. And this spell is smart because if I run it again, I won't have any updated values because it's all based on the last date, the last time a line has been edited on Airtable. So you won't spend some compute times and your spell will be unvauled quickly because we don't sync entry that hasn't been synced before. So that's the main part for the configuration. And I will explain how this spell is working for you. So at start I'm using a library named bottleneck to limit the number of requests we can do on Airtable, because Airtable is limited to 5 requests per second. So we want to have this kind of limitation to not break the rate limiter on Airtable, and I'm using here the meta storage feature on Meta API to save the last synchronization date. So I just define here the key. I'm receiving the today date, that's for the last part of your spell. And I'm retrieving the last date saved on our meta storage. So I can see here the last thing, Airtable 2, Grist, last, save, date. So I see that I have my current date. And I take it, or I define the date to a distant date to sync everything. Then I'm using a formula on Airtable to only select the line which have been modified since our last sync date. So I'm retrieving all the data. I have defined a function to convert an Airtable result to a Grist body. I will use it later. I define there the number of created entry and updated entry. So it's first updated entries and not created entries for each record from Airtable. I check if I have something inside the Grist ID column. If I have nothing, that's mean that this entry hasn't been synced yet on Grist. So it will be a new entry on Grist. Otherwise it will be an entry to sync. So if I have something inside this field, I use my function to convert the old Airtable fields to Grist body. And I precise the name of the Grist column to define the ID on Grist. And then I call this endpoint on Grist to update the document and to update the line. If we don't have any Grist ID on Airtable, that means that we have to create a new entry. So like this one, I create the body from all the entry and then I call this endpoint on Grist to add a new entry. Once this connector has been executed, I will have inside the Grist result, Grist ID where this entry has been added. So I take this ID and I update the entry. On Airtable to set this field under the Grist ID. That's what I'm doing. So I'm taking the record ID from Airtable. And I set inside the Grist ID. The ID from the Grist creation. And at last I update inside meta storage. The lasting date to say hey, everything has been synced. So the next time I run this sync, I would start by to this date, the last run of this spell. That's it. And I'm returning some entry to the console if you want to check anything. But that haven't any consequences on the working spell. So now your spell is done. So let's create a new version to push it on production. I will call it view. Okay, perfect. And then I will go back to the spell detail page. Click on scheduler, and then schedule it to, for example, run the spell every hour. And that's it. The scheduler is created. So now your spell will run every hour. And will sync everywhere your Airtable database to Grist. So that's it guys. Have fun with this spell and don't hesitate to send us any feedback on YouTube or on our Discord channel. Bye.